So, hello everyone. So, moving over now to video number 2. Sorry about the disruption. My dad had just gone and got me some potatoes and carrots, and yeah, obviously I couldn't answer it while I was doing the video. So, okay, so carrying on to your comments now. So the next one of you says, being from the US, I think the UK is much worse in terms of being gung-ho for new age neurodiversity. A lot of therapy techniques of the time involved a lot of shaming, and that really messed up my self-esteem. The point of the neurodiversity concept is that people are different through no fault of their own, and that perhaps others should also put some effort into accommodating, and that coping strategies are acceptable. In many ways, I saw the current distortion of what was more commonly understood as the concept happen in real time. I am personally disappointed that neurodiversity has lost meaning as something I did find a bit of empowerment in as a teenager. I also wonder what happened because a lot of the more fringe ideologies, autism is not a disability, get rid of diagnosis, were regarded as outliers, but now much of that feels endemic. So yes, so that's very interesting indeed, and I can see what you're saying. I do think that there has been a change in the neurodiversity movement over time, and certainly I think not that long ago it was a far more moderated, and people weren't saying it wasn't a disability quite so much. So yeah, I think things have kind of changed, and the whole idea of it not being a disability has now maybe become a lot more endemic. So that's an interesting perspective. Another comment now. To me, neurodivergent is an umbrella term which also includes non-disabling phenomena such as synesthesia, hyperlexia, perhaps broader phenotype. I think it has its value in that respect. I do not think it should be used in clinical setting, especially not as a euphemism for autism or disability. So yeah, I agree that it should definitely not be used as a euphemism for autism or disability. I personally prefer the term neurodisabled as opposed to neurodivergent. And I agree that conditions such as synesthesia, which I also happen to have, synesthesia is a perfectly benign, natural variation, which basically means a blurring of the senses. So in my case, I see numbers and letters as coloured, and I also have a spatially laid out timeline in my head, of months of the year, days of the week, numbers, alphabet, all of that, words in colour, time in colour, everything like that is in colour and all very pictorial. That's fine, it's, my cousin also has it and he's not autistic. That's just a natural variation. Yes, it is true, however, that sometimes I have heard of instances where synesthesia can sometimes cause problems. It depends on the type of synesthesia you have. There are some types where it can actually be borderline disabling. So there are instances of that. But as a general rule, synesthesia is not usually considered to be disabling, and it often brings great pleasure to people and enriches their lives. I disagree with hyperlexia though, because hyperlexia, hyperlexia is not a diagnosis, it's actually a symptom, and it very often happens in autism, but it doesn't have to happen in autism. It can also be a standalone thing, or it can be a symptom of other developmental conditions. But hyperlexia, actually, I would argue, is disabling. I think sometimes people get the wrong idea as to what hyperlexia is. like I've heard some people in the neurodiversity movement claim to have hyperlexia when they were younger because they were really precocious readers, or they learned to read really, 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 really young. But that is not what hyperlexia is. That's just precocious reading. Hyperlexia is where there's a disharmony between your ability to decode, that's to say your ability to essentially to read, and your ability to comprehend. So someone with hyperlexia typically will read very, very, very early, often without any support, although I'm not sure that that's an essential part of the definition. But the key thing really is that someone reads early, essentially. They learn to decode early, and they pick up reading very quickly. It's almost like a kind of splinter skill for them, like a strength. And they can end up reading really, really fast, while other kids are maybe still stumbling over their words. But the person with hyperlexia is not reading for meaning. They're not comprehending the text. Because typically, when you learn how to read, comprehension is at the same sort of level as your ability to decode. And I know, in dyslexia, there can also be issues with comprehension. But in dyslexia, decoding is also impaired. It's the disharmony between the ability to read really well, in terms of decoding, in terms of the mechanics of reading, but not being able to comprehend, which is what hyperlexia is. And hyperlexia can also involve an obsessive fascination with letters and numbers, but I know there are different interpretations of what hyperlexia is, and I think there's also different types of hyperlexia, there are subtypes. So I guess it would depend what subtype of hyperlexia a person has. There's going to be slight kind of variations in terms of how hyperlexia affects someone. But there's often a very obsessive, narrow preoccupation with either letters or numbers or both. But they're kind of they're not. The child is not reading for meaning. It's almost just a kind of a repetitive kind of narrow splinter skill. And this is really common in autism, but it's a disability because not reading for meaning, just reading but without understanding, that's a disability. So I disagree that is an example of neurodivergence, because I actually think that's something quite severe, actually, and can actually really hold you back. I mean, I very likely had hyperlexia when I was a child, and I certainly met the definition of a relatively early decoder, but without comprehension, which is often used as the kind of the main kind of the main interpretation of what hyperlexia is, that disharmony. And I certainly had that feature, and it held me back. It's difficult, So I disagree about that, but everything else you say I agree with. I certainly think synesthesia could be understood as just neurodivergence. I suppose left-handedness could be understood as a form of neurodivergence as well. And that would fit purely under the social model, is that in the past, left-handedness was a disability. Everything was geared towards the right-handed. Nowadays, left-handedness is not really a disability, because in most societies, obviously there will be exceptions, but it's not intrinsically disabling. It would only be disabling in a society where everything is catered towards the right-handed. So you could see left-handedness as a kind of natural variation in that respect. Okay, so I'm going to stop now. Do let me know what you think, and I'll carry on with these comments in another video. So thank you for watching.